The air in the grand dining hall was thick with the scent of lavender and polished mahogany, the kind of room that screamed old money and older grudges. Clara sat at the edge of the long, ornate table, her fingers nervously tracing the rim of her crystal wine glass. The chandelier above cast fractured light across the faces of her husband's family, each one a study in polite disdain. Her mother-in-law, Beatrice, presided at the head of the table, her silver hair swept into a severe bun, her eyes sharp as the cutlery. Clara had always felt like an outsider in the Warrington family, a commoner who'd somehow snagged their golden boy Edward. Tonight, though, the tension was different, sharper, more deliberate. It was Beatrice's annual family gala, a lavish affair where the Warringtons displayed their wealth and superiority to anyone who dared breathe their air. Clara, in her simple navy dress, felt like a smudge on their pristine canvas. She'd spent the evening dodging pointed questions about her humble upbringing, her lack of pedigree, and her failure to produce an heir in the 2 years since she'd married Edward. Every smile from Beatrice was a blade, every compliment a veiled insult. "Clara, dear, you must feel so out of place among all this," Beatrice had said earlier, her voice dripping with faux concern as she gestured to the opulent surroundings. Clara had smiled tightly, her stomach twisting, but said nothing. She'd learned early on that silence was her best defense against Beatrice's barbs. Edward, seated beside her, was oblivious, chatting animatedly with his cousin about stock portfolios. Clara envied his ease, his ability to glide through this world without feeling its weight. She loved him, but sometimes she wondered if he truly saw her, the real her, not the quiet wife he'd brought into this lion's den. The evening had started innocently enough, with champagne toasts and a string quartet playing Vivaldi in the corner. But as the dessert plates were cleared, Beatrice clapped her hands, silencing the room. "My dear family and friends," she announced, her voice carrying the authority of a queen. "Tonight, we shall have a special treat. As you know, music is the soul of the Warrington legacy. My late husband was a patron of the arts, and our family has always prided itself on cultivating talent." Her eyes slid to Clara, and a chill ran down Clara's spine. "To honor that tradition, I've decided we should have an impromptu performance, and who better to grace us than Clara?" The room turned to her, a sea of curious and skeptical faces. Clara's heart stuttered. She hadn't touched a piano in years, not since she'd buried that part of her life. Beatrice knew that, or at least she thought she did. "Oh, Beatrice." "I don't think," Clara began, but Beatrice cut her off with a wave of her hand. "Nonsense, dear. You're part of the family now. Surely you can manage a little piece for us. Unless, of course, you feel unprepared." The word hung in the air like a challenge, and the room tittered. Clara felt Edward's hand on hers, a gentle squeeze, but it did little to ease the knot in her chest. Beatrice's smile was predatory, her eyes glinting with the certainty of Clara's failure. "I've chosen something special for you," Beatrice continued, gesturing to the gleaming Steinway grand piano in the corner of the room. "A piece that's been in our family for generations. Liszt's La Campanella. I'm sure you've heard of it." The name hit Clara like a slap. La Campanella was notorious, a fiendishly difficult piece that even seasoned pianists approached with caution. Its cascading notes and relentless tempo were a test of skill, precision, and endurance. Clara's mouth went dry. She hadn't played in public since she was a teenager, and even then, it had been a different life, one she'd left behind for reasons she didn't dare revisit. Beatrice's choice wasn't random. It was a trap designed to expose Clara's inadequacy in front of the entire family. Clara stood, her legs unsteady, as the room watched her every move. Whispers followed her as she crossed to the piano, her heels clicking on the polished floor. She could feel Beatrice's gaze boring into her, could hear the unspoken taunts. "You don't belong here. You'll never be one of us." Clara sat at the bench, her fingers hovering over the keys. The piano was a thing of beauty, its ebony surface reflecting the chandelier's light like a dark mirror. She took a breath, trying to steady herself, but her mind was a storm. Memories she'd buried for years surged to the surface late nights in a cramped studio. Her mother's voice urging her to practice, the weight of expectations that had nearly crushed her. She'd been a prodigy once, a girl who could make a piano sing like it was an extension of her soul. But that was before the pressure, the burnout, the moment she'd walked away from it all. Now, here she was, forced to perform a piece that could break even the most confident musician. The room was silent, waiting for her to falter. Beatrice leaned forward in her chair, her lips curled in anticipation. Clara's fingers trembled, but something else stirred inside her, a spark of defiance, a refusal to let this woman win. She glanced at Edward, who gave her an encouraging nod, unaware of the stakes. Clara closed her eyes, letting the silence settle, and then her fingers touched the keys. Asterisk, the first notes of La Campanella rang out, tentative at first, like a bird testing its wings. The piece began with a delicate, bell-like melody, deceptively simple before it spiraled into a cascade of arpeggios and trills. Clara's hands moved on instinct, muscle memory kicking in despite the years of rest. She stumbled slightly on the first run, her fingers slipping on a particularly tricky passage, and a murmur rippled through the room. Beatrice's smile widened, but Clara didn't stop. She pushed through, her focus narrowing to the keys, the music, the rhythm pulsing in her veins. The notes began to flow more smoothly, her hands finding their old strength. She could feel the room shifting, the whispers fading as the music swelled. The piece was relentless, demanding every ounce of her skill, but Clara leaned into it, her fingers dancing across the keys with growing confidence. She wasn't just playing, she was fighting, pouring years of suppressed passion into every note. The melody soared, then plunged, then soared again, each phrase a defiance of Beatrice's expectations. Clara's heart pounded, not with fear, now, but with exhilaration. She was no longer the timid daughter-in-law. She was the girl who'd once commanded concert halls, who'd made audiences weep with her music. The final section of the piece loomed, a brutal sequence of leaps and trills that could unravel even a seasoned performer. Clara's breath hitched, but she pressed on, her fingers flying, the notes ringing out like a storm breaking. When the final chord sounded, the room was silent, stunned, as if the air itself had been sucked out. Clara opened her eyes, her chest heaving, and met Beatrice's gaze. The older woman's face was frozen, her mouth slightly open, her eyes wide with something that looked like shock or fear. Asterisk, the silence broke with a single clap, then another, until the room erupted in applause. Edward was on his feet, beaming with pride, while his relatives exchanged bewildered glances. Clara stood, her legs shaking, and gave a small bow, her face flushed with a mix of triumph and disbelief. She'd done it. She'd played La Campanella not perfectly, but well enough to silence every doubter in the room, except one. Beatrice's expression hadn't softened. If anything, it had hardened, her lips pressed into a thin line. Clara knew this wasn't the end. Beatrice wasn't the type to let a defeat go unanswered. As the guests swarmed around her, offering congratulations and asking where she'd learned to play like that, Clara felt a strange mix of pride and dread. She'd revealed a part of herself she'd kept hidden, and there was no going back. Edward pulled her into a hug, whispering, "I had no idea you could do that." Clara smiled, but her eyes drifted to Beatrice, who was already whispering to her sister, her gaze never leaving Clara. The night wasn't over, and neither was the war. The days after the gala were a blur of whispers and sidelong glances. Clara had hoped her performance would shift the dynamic with the Warringtons, maybe earn her a sliver of respect, but instead, it seemed to deepen the divide. Beatrice was colder than ever, her smiles tighter, her comments laced with a venom that made Clara's skin crawl. "Quite the little surprise you pulled," Beatrice said one morning over breakfast, her tone as sharp as the knife she used to butter her toast. "One might wonder what else you're hiding." Clara forced a smile, her stomach twisting. She wanted to believe she'd won, that her triumph at the piano had put Beatrice in her place. But the older woman's eyes told a different story. Beatrice wasn't defeated, she was plotting. Edward, bless his heart, was oblivious to the undercurrents, thrilled by Clara's newfound status as the family's hidden gem. He'd even suggested she play at the next charity event, oblivious to the panic that idea sparked in her. Clara hadn't touched a piano since that night, the weight of her performance still heavy on her shoulders. She'd locked that part of her life away for a reason, and now it was clawing its way back, threatening to unravel everything she'd built. The truth was, Clara hadn't just been a talented pianist, she'd been a prodigy, a once-in-a-generation talent who'd performed in concert halls across Europe by the time she was 16. But that life had come at a cost. Endless pressure, a mother who saw her as a ticket to fame, and a breakdown at 17 that had left her unable to touch a piano for years. She'd walked away, changed her name, and built a new life, one where she was just Clara, not Clara the Prodigy. Marrying Edward had been her chance at normalcy, but now, thanks to Beatrice, that past was creeping back. It was a week later when Beatrice struck again. The Warringtons were hosting a charity concert at their estate, a black tie affair attended by the city's elite. Clara had hoped to stay in the background, but Beatrice had other plans. "Clara, darling," she said at a family meeting, her voice syrupy with false warmth, "the committee has requested you perform. After your surprising display at the gala, how could we deny them?" Clara's heart sank. The request was no such thing. It was Beatrice's doing, another chance to test her, to push her into a spotlight she'd spent years avoiding. Edward squeezed her hand, his eyes bright with pride. "You'll be amazing, love," he said, and Clara wanted to scream. He didn't understand what this meant, what it cost her to play. But refusing wasn't an option, not with Beatrice. Watching, not with the entire family waiting for her to prove herself again. The piece Beatrice chose this time was even more daunting. Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 3, a monstrous work that had broken greater pianists than Clara. It wasn't just a solo piece. It required an orchestra, precision, and emotional depth that could shatter a performer. Beatrice had upped the ante, banking on Clara's failure in front of a much larger audience. "I've arranged for the city's Philharmonic to accompany you," Beatrice added, her smile razor-sharp. No pressure, of course. Clara felt the walls closing in. She wanted to run, to disappear like she had all those years ago, but something inside her refused to break. She'd survived Beatrice's first challenge. She could survive this one too. The weeks leading up to the concert were a grueling mix of practice and paranoia. Clara spent hours at the piano in a rented studio, away from the Warrington estate, rekindling her connection to the instrument she'd once loved and feared. The Concerto No. 3 was a beast, its dense chords and soaring melodies demanding everything she had. Her fingers ached, her shoulders tensed, but with each session she felt the old fire returning. She wasn't just playing to prove Beatrice wrong, she was playing for herself, for the girl who'd been silenced by fear and expectation. But Beatrice wasn't idle. Clara caught glimpses of her mother-in-law's schemes, hushed conversations with family members, pointed questions about Clara's past, even a private investigator tailing her to the studio. Beatrice was digging, searching for the truth Clara had buried. One evening, as Clara practiced, She found an old newspaper clipping slipped under the studio door, a review of her final performance as a teenager, praising Clara Voss, the prodigy who will redefine music. Her real name, her old life, exposed. Her heart raced. Beatrice was closing in, and Clara knew the concert would be more than a performance. It would be a reckoning. The night of the concert arrived. The estate transformed into a glittering stage. The audience filled the grand hall, their jewels sparkling under the chandeliers. Clara stood backstage, her black gown clinging to her frame, her hands clammy. The orchestra tuned their instruments, a low hum that mirrored the buzz in her head. Edward was in the front row, his face a mix of pride and nerves, while Beatrice sat beside him, her expression unreadable. Clara's stomach churned, but she pushed it down. This was her moment, not Beatrice's, not the Warringtons, but hers. The conductor signaled, and Clara stepped onto the stage, the spotlight blinding. The applause was polite but tepid, the audience unaware of what was to come. She sat at the piano, her fingers steady now, and nodded to the conductor. The orchestra began, a swell of strings and brass that enveloped her. The opening chords of the Concerto No. 3 were like a storm breaking, and Clara dove in, her hands commanding the keys with a fierceness she hadn't felt in years. The music was a torrent sweeping her up, and she let it carry her. The first movement was a battle, her fingers racing through intricate passages, the orchestra matching her intensity. She could feel the audience leaning forward, their skepticism giving way to awe. The second movement, slow and haunting, was where she poured her heart, every pain, every fear, every triumph. Tears pricked her eyes, but she didn't falter. By the third movement, she was soaring, the music a wildfire that consumed the room. When the final chord rang out, the hall was silent for a heartbeat, then erupted in a standing ovation. Clara stood, her chest heaving, and looked out at the crowd. Edward was on his feet, tears in his eyes. And Beatrice was frozen, her face a mask of shock, her hand still in her lapdot as the applause thundered. Clara took her bow, but the moment was interrupted by a voice from the back of the hall. "Clara Voss," someone shouted, and the crowd turned. A man in a tweed jacket stepped forward, holding up a phone. "Is it true? Are you the prodigy who disappeared?" The room buzzed, and Clara's heart stopped. Beatrice's doing she'd leaked the truth, timed perfectly to steal Clara's moment. But Clara was done hiding. She straightened, her voice clear as she addressed the crowd. "Yes, I was Clara Voss. I walked away from that life because it nearly destroyed me. But tonight, I played for me, not for fame, not for you, but for the music I love." The audience was silent, then erupted again, louder than before. Beatrice's face was ashen, her plan backfiring spectacularly. Clara had claimed her truth, and in doing so, she'd claimed her power. As she left the stage, Edward pulled her into a hug, whispering, "I'm so proud of you." For the first time, Clara felt like she belonged, not just in his world, but in her own. Beatrice's campaign had failed, but Clara knew the war wasn't over. She'd face whatever came next, not as a victim, but as a prodigy reborn. Don't miss out on stories like Clara's, where courage meets talent and secrets change everything. Subscribe to our channel now for more epic tales of triumph and drama. Hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications, and join our community to see how Clara's journey unfolds in future stories. Your support keeps these stories alive. Let's make more unforgettable moments together.